I think the problem that people have with solving listeners' problems is a lot of listeners don't have problems right now. Like, people love Spotify, people love the DSPs that they use. The UX is great. There's a lot of good things on the listener side. It just happens to be at the expense, oftentimes, of the artist side. But if we can, create systems that, in the good ways, learn from these platforms and what these platforms are doing right on the listener side, maybe we have an opportunity to bring some of those listeners into this on-chain world.
Episode 46 of Invest in Music with Mike and Jeremy of Catalog Radio. Today we're here to talk about their new product and the journey building the premier 101 marketplace for on-chain music. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. It's the best way to support our guests, so without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 46 of Invest in Music with Catalog Radio. We are back. We got a dual episode today. Jeremy and Mike from Catalog. How are you feeling today, guys?
What up? Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
That's been great.
It's been an amazing last couple of weeks. You guys had a really amazing launch with Catalog Radio. I saw a bunch of community reception. It looked like it went super well. I'd love for you guys to give us a quick overview of what you guys launched in the last couple of weeks and then kind of what it was that led up to launching a product like Catalog Radio.
Yeah, I can give a quick overview and then let Jeremy jump in and see where it goes. In short, Catalog Radio is a live 24/7 real broadcast radio of curated on-chain music. And the real, I think, core difference from a traditional internet radio is that all the music is on chain. And so in one click, you can easily support the music that's coming on in real time. And I think a lot of the motivation for this was even before we started Catalog, just thinking about how we can drive more support to artists. And as NFT marketplaces began to proliferate, the real impetus for Catalog originally for the marketplace was there's not a place here for music. All these marketplaces are built for visual art and audiovisual videos. And so I say that to say that music has its own unique needs, and it has unique facets that visual art doesn't necessarily have. And I think with radio, we're taking advantage of the sort of real-time duration of music and the ability to bring people together around that experience and the social energy you can create in those spaces, driving support to artists by basically translating that social energy to simple, frictionless support.
Yeah. And we're also just, Mike and I have been working on internet music projects since college together. And one of our dissatisfactions with the online music as it stands generally is that most experiences are pretty homogenous. Most DSPs are really just the same app reskinned and rebranded. And we've always been interested in creating net new kinds of music experiences online. And with blockchain as an underlying technology, I think it really allows us to explore that design space in a more fun and engaging way that helps drive more value to artists and makes it more engaging for listeners. And one of those projects that we explored early on was this one called Loft Radio. It's basically a 24/7 stream of lo-fi beats music and a kind of a fun little website. Similar energy. There's a chat. Whenever someone tips the currently playing song in ETH, it shows up to the whole room. So that was kind of our first experiment in this space. Something that we got to meet and work with you on in the early days. Shout out Metacartel, but we learned a lot from that. And there's a lot of people to this day that still like to point to that as an interesting and novel on-chain music experience that is interesting to us, that even after not really maintaining that at all, it's still kept up with people in their mind share. So we had a lot of visions for that we kind of tabled when we went to work on the Catalog marketplace. And it's really exciting for us to be able to bring some of that back to life.
Yeah, it's definitely a very full circle moment for me. My first experience meeting you guys was you had this radio product that was very novel at the time. This was probably 2018, 2019, if I had to guess. And I remember it was one of the very first music crypto products that I had came across. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you guys learned from your time building Loft Radio and how that informed what you guys ended up releasing with Catalog Radio.
One thing out of the gates is that lo-fi in general as a genre is a kind of an interesting case study in the streaming or pay-per-play evaluation model for music, because it's a very passive listening experience. And we were seeing these live stream channels on YouTube that were getting tons and tons of attention, but we learned that none of the artists were getting paid for that. And while the channel itself was making tons of money. So it seemed like a good entry point. But on top of that, a lot of these artists, they're streaming they have more streams than Grammy nominated or award winning artists, but they couldn't sell a ticket for the life of them because no one knows who they are. So that was an interesting case study that I think cracked open a lot of our initial thoughts around how can this technology bring new value models for music. But the other was that, one, there was definitely some friction onboarding artists into crypto. There was, at the time, MetaMask was kind of the only option, and onboarding over 50 artists through that was a learning experience that, okay, this isn't something that a lot of people are interested in. These aren't hoops that a lot of people are interested in jumping through, but having a fun, novel product to showcase their music, in most cases, was an interesting enough value prop for them to jump through those hoops. So even though not all of them made a significant amount of money, it was interesting to learn that, if people really like what you're doing and have an appreciation for the product itself, and it's an experience that people like, then that's reason to, go out of your way to try something new.
I also think, like, just on a practical builder's level, this was our first thing that we put out into the world, and me and Jeremy have been working together for a while, and just to get that experience of like product design, developing, actually needing to scope something to the realistic point where you can actually build it and putting it out, seeing how the community responds, like all that, doing that for the first time is such a huge learning experience. And I think it really built our muscle up around like how we work together, how we ship products, how we scope projects, and like kind of like establishing some values, I think, that we shared together as builders around like the level of detail and the design polish and brand and things like that. And then the other thing is, like, I think maybe the most common feedback that we got, at least from people in the Web3 space, in particular Peter Pan, who I know you know, was that I want something in return. Like, you can tip artists in this space, but can I get an NFT? Can I get something? And we weren't really prepared. Like, we hadn't built Loft on the kind of infrastructure that was ready to scale to where we wanted to take it. And by the time we sort of were at that point where we thought about doing something bigger, NFTs sort of presented themselves as a more compelling opportunity for artists. But it really is, like you said, a full circle moment, because we started when there wasn't really a vast library of on-chain music. And so enabling NFTs for all this music was a much bigger endeavor back then than it would have been to build Catalog Radio now. And 3 years after that, 4 years after that, now we're in a place, blessed to be in a place where the on-chain music library is huge. And there's a lot of really incredible music in this space that enables us to build a product like Catalog Radio. So yeah, it's carried through the DNA all the way through, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to revisit this core idea.
Same here. And take me through that journey of going from Loft Radio to Catalog, as I think many people know it today, a premier one-of-one marketplace for music. What was that progression like, and how did you guys land upon that as being the core focus following something like Loft Radio?
So Loft Radio started as just a boiled down version of early ideation around SoundCloud alternatives. And in the Loft Radio process, we were constantly talking to different artists, asking them about their needs, what platforms like Bandcamp were doing well for them, or SoundCloud was doing well, what wasn't being met. And a lot of those conversations is what started to inform our worldview of how we could do more with the technology. Because at the end of the day, Loft Radio was just sending small ETH tips to an artist's wallet address, which is interesting, but there's so much more that the technology enables than just permissionless payments. And so we participated in hackathons like ETH Denver, as well as ETH Global One Online, which the original Catalog sort of hackathon project spawned out of. That idea was focused around basically social tokens for artists that would give you revenue share in the artist sales on that platform, as well as they could be used for things like rewards points or community tokens, however the artist wanted them to be. And that was a fun proof of concept. We also worked on a project called Bound that was kind of like tokenized bonding curves that unlocked access to something kind of like akin to a Patreon. But in building these different things, in talking to artists and learning about their needs, it became more clear over time that one, a lot of like the crypto, like the complex crypto stuff like bonding curves doesn't land with a lot of people who are new to the space. And two, around this time, NFTs were emerging, and we were starting to see all these people who were able to make pretty incredible amount of money off of them. And while a lot of that was hype that came and went, and now we're in a place where we have to think a little bit harder about building things that people actually want to use and not just speculate on. It was an interesting time because we realized, actually, NFTs as a medium make a lot of sense for music because you're no longer attaching the payment method for a song to the artist specifically. You actually have a new unit to encapsulate the song, which is the NFT. So that design space opened up a ton for us, and was what seeded Catalog in the early days. But yeah, it just being able to play around with the design space for on-chain music, where every song has a wallet address or multiple tied to it and can have its own social graph around it, is something that was really interesting to us and that we started to lean into with Catalog.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much covers it from my perspective. The only thing that I might add is that I think we always saw Loft Radio as sort of a stepping stone of like, we know there's something bigger beyond this. We don't really know what it is, but let's make this thing small and put it out into the world and see where that takes us. And it just so happened that, like, I think that's why we were able to, with that and a little bit of luck, time things so well with just like the timing of when we put Catalog out into the world, because we were kind of like already anticipating that moment happening from the inception of Loft, some kind of opportunity like that. And then the other thing with Catalog specifically and how we landed on the model, like, it's a one-of-one marketplace, obviously, which is a decision. And I think we really wanted to, we've always just wanted to experiment with new value models, and approaching it from a one-of-one perspective is like a complete flip on the current status quo of value models for music. And so for us, it was like really running the true experiment of like, is this even possible? Can we value music like fine art? This has never been a thing for recorded music. Is this going to work? Is anyone going to be interested in this? It's not never been a thing. I want to pay respect to all the people that have minted music NFTs before, but we just wanted to go to the edge really and like explore what that looked like, and that's how we landed on the initial model.
It was really interesting because you guys were actually the place where many musicians did their first ever mint. They had never played around with tokens before or buying anything on OpenSea or anything like that. Like, their very first experience with crypto was actually minting a song on Catalog. How did you think about being that gateway into the space? And what do those conversations look like with artists when they were joining Catalog a couple of years ago versus how you're talking to artists and how they're joining things like Catalog Radio today?
I think that maybe the biggest obvious difference in those days were that like everyone just got to ride a crazy market wave that was kind of unprecedented. And when we were, just the way that Catalog was timed, like as we were approaching launch in the months building up, so many of the musicians that we wanted to talk to were already familiar. They were already having these conversations. It's like NFTs were just so embedded in the art world and in the music world and in every conversation that was happening because they were so new, and people saw a lot of money flowing through them. And so for us, it was, I think, an easier sell at the time because the opportunity to earn revenue, which is ultimately like the core problem that we're aiming to solve, is let's help artists make a living from their music. That was right in front of people, and it was an opportunity that was very present. And so we were able to talk to like some of our dream artists. And I think an approach that we took from the very beginning is, obviously we're a curated platform and we care deeply about the curation, and we think it's an important almost like responsibility that we take on, because I think especially now, like music NFTs in a lot of circles in the music world don't have the best brand. I think some people kind of don't want to associate with them for whatever reason, whether that's environmental or they see $1 million, pictures go up for sale, whatever it is. And so I think that, whatever we can do to make artists more comfortable in this space and provide a space for them that they don't feel like they're, making any sacrifices as far as like how they express their art or where their art is contextualized. And I think just, building up a community of music that we think is great was the most like intuitive starting point for that. I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, to build on that, with crypto, speculation is often what brings people into the fold. And like Mike alluded to, the timing of when we launched Catalog was pretty miraculous in the sense that all these musicians, especially coming at, it was still late era lockdown where no one was really touring, and a lot of artists' previous sources of revenue were temporarily halted. And so a lot of the speculation, I think, brings people in the door. But nowadays, when the tide has kind of gone out and it's less likely that you're just going to be able to mint anything and have it sell, in a lot of ways that's flipped. And now a lot of the people who are still here or are entering the space now are often less so in it for the speculative reasons and more so interested in the technology itself. But we still very much have the problem of branding, I think, of NFTs. I know you've talked a lot about this. I thought the episode you guys did with Derek today was spot on in that regard, is that NFTs kind of have this branding problem, and crypto more largely as well. So one of the things that we've tried to embody in all the products that we build is building things that people genuinely enjoy using, regardless of their involvement in crypto or not. And I think there's a lot that we can still do to kind of abstract away some of that to bring new people into the fold. But at the end of the day, no one's going to want to mint something just for the sake of minting it, unless they're like really, really interested in the technology, which is rare. But if we can build something that people are genuinely interested in because they like the product and because they enjoy using it and want to be a part of that, then I think that's a really powerful place to start.
How did you guys deal with that as a company? For my perspective, you have this launch where you get all these incredible artists to come on. They've never touched crypto before. They're minting these NFTs. They're selling them for 1-2 ETH a piece. They're making a couple $1,000s. It's really a truly magic moment for a lot of people. To your point, these artists aren't touring. So in a lot of ways, it was their primary source of income. Then I think the whole NFT narrative starts to unravel. And all of a sudden, NFTs go from being this super cool thing that's a great way for you to make money to it being something that people are really afraid to associate with. I'm really curious to hear if you guys felt that sentiment internally when you were talking to artists, or kind of what your relationship was with your artist community as the market started to change as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is we've both been sort of in and around this space for long enough to know that the markets come and go. And so as the NFT market is going crazy, if you've been through a cycle or two, or even if you haven't, you kind of know this reaches a stopping point at some point and we hit a trough, and you got to be able to weather that. And also we've been sort of tinkering on music products long enough that our conviction is just like, this is what we want to do. This is what we've been doing for almost, a decade now, whether it's just ideating or designing or actually shipping products. And so I think that through the ups and downs, there's just like a degree of resilience that we've probably built in doing this for a while. But on the artist side, like we used to do early on, we did a lot of outreach. We were talking to artists a lot. And when the market sort of went away and things got quieter, it didn't feel like natural to do the same level of outreach because we didn't want to force anything. And I think we got to a point, even with our own product, where it didn't feel the same as it did in the early days. And that when we were talking to artists in the early days, we all genuinely felt like this is in your best interest to put your music here. Like this is good. And we're trying to we want to give you the information. And if you are interested in it, please, we'd love to have you. As the market kind of went away, particularly on catalog, the one-of-one market took a dive. And so for us, it wasn't as intuitive as a sell, even for us to tell artists this, because the chances of solving these artist problems, like making money, start to go way, way down. And then we start to feel like, are we even being authentic by talking to artists in this way? And I think that a lot of that is even an impetus for just changing it up and solving these problems that if we're in a bear market, we need to have a product that's resilient through a bear or a bull. And regardless of the market fluctuations, we're still solving artist problems. So that starts the conversation internally of okay, what are the things that we need to solve for? How can we build something sustainable that even when there's not crazy highs and, people speculating on crazy shit and everything, how do we build something that sustains through those periods?
Yeah, echo all that. And the one thing I'd add is just in those conversations with artists, in those early days and now, just always presenting this as a tool and another tool in your toolkit as an artist, alongside merch, alongside shows, alongside streaming. There's no guarantees by using this stuff. And like we talked about, there's risks in terms of backlash from fans or just having to spend a lot of time with this new technology and learn a lot of new terms and processes. So really just presenting it as hey, this is something that you can use in addition to all the other things you're using and experiment with, and treat it as such. And if it's something you get a lot of value out of and want to lean into, then we can continue to show you more doors to walk through. But at the end of the day, it's really just another tool.
I really like that word sustainable because it's something that I've thought a lot about recently too, where there's so much great music that can still be brought on chain. And I think, Mike, to your credit, there is exponentially more music than there was back in 2019. You could spend days and days discovering great music that's on chain today, but it still represents just a blip of all of the great music that exists in the world today. And so when I think about bringing an artist on chain, I think maybe a year ago, it was kind of like, here's this new world that's super exciting. If you put a lot of time and energy into it, you're going to be able to see, a really strong return on your investment from a time and energy perspective. You're going to meet all these new people that are really excited about it. I think these days, when I think about bringing artists on chain, I just think about how do you earn someone an extra $100 a month? Like how do you give them something that's so supplemental that it's kind of a no-brainer? And how do you do it in such a way that it doesn't require you to be on Twitter Spaces? It doesn't require you to be talking about crypto on Instagram or on Twitter, because I think that a lot of artists that have commercial success just recognize that there is a very big disdain about this space. And so I think, unfortunately, what that's resulted in is you have on-chain music and then you have regular music. And I think for as much as I want those two worlds to come together at some point in the future, I've been very transparent in identifying that those currently are two separate places and telling artists, all you need to do is just put your music up here. I'm not going to say you're going to make $1 million overnight or even a couple thousand like it was in the early days of NFTs. But if you put your music up here, there's a high likelihood you could make 50, $100. And I think for a lot of artists, the easier that can be to realize that they don't have to be fully bought into the on-chain music vision, world utopia, whatever you want to call it, and they can just have their music somewhere else for new people to discover. It's been kind of the way that I've been navigating at least these last couple months. And I guess turning that into a question for you guys, has that been kind of your approach to catalog radio and how you're thinking about talking to artists nowadays, or how has that shifted in recent months relative to the way that you were pitching these products to artists in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. And I think the immediate thing that comes to mind for me is that the core problem I think that many people or most people or projects or platforms are trying to solve for the space is how do we get artists paid? How do we help artists make a living? In the absence of that, let's assume there's a bear market, and that's not really a guarantee by any means in the space. How else do we solve artist problems, or how else do we provide value? And I think two of the core ways that we've identified are like bring ears to the music, just get people in the room to listen to artist music. And then hopefully in that you can drive some community building for an artist, whether that's developing their fan base or connecting between fans and artists. And I think radio is kind of sets the stage to be a really great medium for those things, where one of the big advantages I think of radio is that from like a business perspective, it's sort of like a distribution layer where we can host album debuts or label compilations or artist spotlights, and really just like we're solving a problem there, right? We're putting the spotlight on this artist. We're putting the spotlight on this album. And these days you'll work on an album for 12 to 18 months and then you put it out into the world, and the experience around it with a fan base is sort of like isolated, like everyone's kind of listening on Spotify or on their own things, and you try to make a moment around it, but with the tools and the ecosystem available, it's kind of hard to create that moment. And I think radio to some degree or has, contributes in some small way to being a place that can facilitate those moments for artists, and just bring people together around the experience of the music. And that alone is valuable. And then hopefully we can sort of use that foundation to, if we can get 1,000 people in the room, if we can get 5,000 people in the room, and enable frictionless support of the songs that you're loving, and also give people something that they value, whether that's a download, an NFT, in product perks, that starts to create something that feels compelling and feels sustainable, even if an artist isn't making $10,000 when they drop their first NFT. It solves problems in other ways that are perhaps more lasting.
Yeah, on the listener collector side, a sentiment that we've heard echoed for a while now is music NFTs sound cool. Well, how do I get started? Where do I look? Like, do I need to actually sit down and sift through all this music that exists on chain until I find something that I like? And the reality is that for a lot of people, a lot of music listeners today, music listening is a passive experience, and that's not true of everyone. And like, we're big fans of crate digging and making playlists and all that good stuff. But by creating radio, we effectively created a new stage to highlight music that Mike was talking about. But also, it's an easy way for people who are interested, whether they're casual listeners or major collectors, to come and discover new music that they might not have otherwise heard, and give those artists an opportunity to be heard in that place. And also, something that we've seen as a result of that is artists who, haven't even minted anything on Catalog in a while, saying, like, I literally saw a tweet yesterday, the day before, where an artist said, "Oh, like, why am I getting all these, 0.001 ETH transaction, or like, I'm getting a couple dollars in my wallet every now and then. Where is this coming from? Like, what's going on?" And that was just a result of their music getting co-signed on Catalog Radio. And so it's also creating, like we were talking about, just another passive income stream by means of this new distribution layer.
Can we go in a little bit more to this whole cosign model that you guys have? And then more specific than that, I know that Catalog Radio is built on Base, something that I'm a really big proponent of. What was the decision like to launch radio on Base, and why was that necessary for this product to come to life?
Yeah, I'll start with why Base, and I'll let Mike talk about cosigns. But yeah, we were originally kind of defaulting to Optimism just because it felt sort of the most brand agnostic place to L2 to put music on chain, and we really like their ethos around like public goods funding, and that was the kind of default assumption for a while. But in having conversations with Jesse and like seeing a lot of the activity that was coming around Base, we were sensing this excitement around it, as well as it just naturally, by being a product of Coinbase, it's something that people can trust and are familiar with. Like, even, my parents, for instance, who have no idea what's going on in crypto these days, when you tell them, "Oh yeah, we are launching on Coinbase's chain," they recognize that, and they can trust that, oh, okay, if they're doing something that Coinbase is involved in, then surely this is a good place for this. But I guess in addition to that, the Base team in general has been incredibly helpful and supportive. They provided a lot of like great infrastructure for us to build on. They're helping poke other third-party services that we were using to make sure that they were supporting their testnets, and they've just been a wonderful force of shining the spotlight on our spotlight to help bring more attention to artists. And that's something that we think was just a huge win, being able to bring more eyes, ears, and wallets onto the music that we think is really amazing.
Yeah, I think the only thing I add to that is that the offboarding and on-ramping potential we see with Base is probably higher than some of the other L2s, just purely because of the resources and the infrastructure that Coinbase already has. But yeah, all that's spot on. As far as cosigns, it was kind of an interesting journey to get to cosigns. I guess first I'll describe what cosigns are. So cosigns are an affordable way to support catalog records for a fixed cost of 0.001 ETH. And what you get in return as a fan or an artist or collector is a high quality download, 1155 non-transferable NFT, and you get some in-product perks like your name on the record page and some other things that we're ideating in the product in the future. And we were in an interesting position because we're coming from a marketplace of one-of-one records on L1. And two of the core problems that we want to solve for are price accessibility with one-of-ones is just not there. The supply of one just commands a higher price naturally. And so it blocks out a lot of fans from participating, which can be awkward for an artist who's minting a record, telling their fans who are maybe not as crypto native, "Hey, I released a song here. Only one of you can own it, and it costs $1,000. It's a niche audience of people that have the money and are interested in collecting records in that way. And then distribution potential in the same way, like the ability to distribute this music far and wide, I think was a problem that one-of-one sort of run into. And so, but we've built this brand, we've built this positioning, we've built this marketplace around one-of-one records. And so how do we have these things coexist? How do we move from point A to point B? I think another thing that we had in mind is like we don't just want to add the tool of like, okay, you can mint editions now, you can do a timed or fixed, because every other marketplace has that in some form or another. And when we make big moves like that, we're really interested in like seeing where we can push the envelope and do something really new. So we set out like some ideals in this new design of like, okay, we want to move to L2, we want to build price accessibility, we want to build distribution potential, but we also want to continue to treat music as a monetarily valuable asset. With radio, we knew we wanted to provide an always on ability to support, because if radio's on in 5 years and 90% of the music is already sold out and you hear a song you like and you go to support it and you can't, just felt like a big wasted opportunity. And then the last thing was, with radio, the core experiment, like if we're dialing it down to like the MVP experiment, it's like, can we create a real-time listening space that enables low-cost support for music that drives support to artists? And so with that, we needed music to launch with, and we wouldn't be able to run that experiment if we wouldn't be able to leverage the existing library of music on Catalog. So how do we build upon the library that we've already built? But these are one-of-ones. How do you enable more support for that? Why is it a one-of-one? So you kind of run into all these roadblocks. And yeah, that's ultimately like how we got to cosigns was, it's a model that's always on. It's in limited supply. It's a fixed price for about $2, 0.001 ETH. Importantly, it's non-transferable. So we don't really see these as like sort of digital collectibles or digital objects in the same way that most NFTs you might think about. We see cosigns as more like, an on-chain endorsement of a song that adds you to a list of supporters of that song. And with that, you get that on-chain record of support, you get that download, and you get those other things. And the reason that I think we landed on non-transferable is we really didn't want to infringe on the one-of-one nature of a one-of-one record. And so this adds a support tier on top of one-of-ones that don't necessarily infringe on that. It also creates a really distinct, a clear distinction between the two models, because we have one-of-ones on layer one that are optimized for permanence, ownership, speculation for some, and provenance. And layer one and one-of-ones just are really congruent. They work well together. And then on the flip side, the complement to that is sort of a lightweight, unlimited supply, low cost, non-transferable kind of means of interaction, like L2 as a medium for minting to like or minting to share, rather than minting necessarily to collect or speculate. And so really drawing that distinction and providing both models for all artists. So as an artist, you still come in and you mint a one-of-one for every record. And then once that's minted, we're automatically creating a cosign token for that one-of-one record. So you have both of these support tiers that you can take advantage of. And you have the option to, just mint a one-of-one if you want to, for example. Long-winded answer. I'll stop there. I think that covers most of it.
There's a lot to unpack in it, and I think Mike nailed it. The few details that I would add is, building on what he just said, we observed the market was kind of moving from this like collect as the means of using NFTs to what felt more like an interact or like an on-chain like, where the cost of adding this thing to your collection became lower and lower and lower, and the supply became greater and greater, or even open or infinite. And with all that in mind, we'd heard a lot of artists talk about how they weren't satisfied with the value of on-chain music basically being driven down to zero again, because it was just a reflection of what had already happened in streaming. Just to speak more to what Mike was saying, cosigns kind of allow for both in that sense. And we really view a cosign as more of an interaction than your traditional speculative like collect. But it also enables for artists and fans, for that matter, to build a much larger on-chain social graph than we were able to with one-on-ones. It allows for just way more on-chain relationships to be forged, and there's lots of interesting things that can be done with that data. And the last detail two details I'd add is cosigns are a pay what you want type model. So you can cosign once, or you could cosign the same song 10 times or 50 times. And because they're 1155, they just stack nicely in your wallet instead of cluttering up with more grid items. And there's things that we and or artists can potentially play around with there. And in addition to that, just to speak to some of the technological details, the way that cosigns work today is an artist still mints the one-of-one on Catalog, and we automatically deploy the cosigns on base to a shared contract, mirroring the metadata and splits if they exist for the one-of-one. So artists don't have to do anything. As soon as they mint the one-of-one, unless they opt out, it's automatically there for them. It could be programmed on radio and they can start earning.
It's really interesting, the paradox around how the pricing of music has evolved over the last 2 years, right? I think early days of Catalog, records were going for like 1 ETH a piece, right? Like I say, that was a pretty standard price. Then we saw this world where 10 editions, 25 editions at point one, then it started to come down and down and down to now basically to the point where, as you just, alluded to, I think that most music is more or less free on chain. You have this mint fee that's basically $1 or two. And I would even say in a lot of ways, I even find like $1 or two per song to be a very high cost for most passive fans to engage with music. And so I think there is this very strange delta which exists now where I think a lot of artists who have been around the space since the early days have had experiences selling their music for thousands of dollars. And so to them, I think that that's something that they hold very near and dear to the chest. And then I look to the other side of the puzzle and I think about how do we bring the next million, 10 million music fans on chain? And personally, I don't actually think that most people are able to spend multiple dollars on multiple songs on a very recurring basis. And so you kind of have this weird paradox where I feel like the on-chain music space is accustomed to a higher price for music. I feel like the rest of the world is used to $9.99 a month for the rest of the world and all the music that you could possibly get. How do you guys think about balancing those two expectations and what that might look like moving forward from here?
Yeah, very astute observation and great question. With one of the things that we've thought about in this context is, well, there is like a community of people who are, the iTunes store is no longer a thing in most people's mind share. But Bandcamp is still a thriving ecosystem for, a lot of independent artists and hardcore music fans. And, there's a lot of people who are very willing to collect pieces of merch, vinyl, cassettes, that kind of thing. And so I think it's true, like the majority of music fans aren't really looking to spend much money or any money on music outside of a DSP subscription and maybe some concert tickets or merch here and there. So when thinking about like, well, what are fans willing to pay for today? An interesting observation that we had that was both a learning from Loft Radio and an observation around like another product outside of Web3 that exists today is sort of this Twitch model where in a live space that's kind of has a fine-tuned experience to drive more support to artists, there are people who are willing to pay for effectively nothing but recognition, and just to be seen. And we see that work very well for a lot of creators on Twitch. And so that was something that we thought was an interesting offering for people in a radio context that you wouldn't necessarily get from just co-signing or minting a song in single player mode.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the opportunity that we see exists to create more value. Like if people, first, I don't think we're necessarily competing for Spotify's user base or their listener base by any means, nor would I say that's necessarily like aspirationally where we're going. But to Jeremy's point, like there are additional pieces of value that you can build in as a project or in a product that can drive more support, such as that social dynamic in a real-time space with other people. Or, I mean, for us, like radio in general as a sort of design space, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. So for Catalog Radio, all the broadcasting infrastructure is built from scratch. So we have a lot of flexibility as far as what we can do and how we can make that more interactive, engaging, and just sort of like interesting. There's a lot of interesting design experiments we can run. And this idea of, cosigns enabling things in the product that actually create real value for fans, whether that's value out of fun and using the product or connecting more deeply with the artist or whatever it is. I think there's a lot of design space there that we're interested in playing with.
Yeah, and in addition to that too, we're not. Oh, sorry, just real quick. In addition to that, like we don't even have to be the sole experimenters in this regard because it's all on chain and permissionless. Anyone can build their own experience around these things, whether that's around minting it or taking advantage of the existing data of who has co-signed what. So we might have our own opinionated ways of trying to bring people into the fold, but the beautiful thing is that anyone can build their own experience around this stuff and on this catalog of music to try other things that might be interesting and enticing.
It's funny for me how the things that I want as a fan of music are things that have existed for a long time in the past. So like, for example, the ability to buy a track for 0.001 ETH and then get a download of that I can use to DJ with is something that's very valuable to me. And I think what I'm noticing kind of about the space as a whole right now is that it always starts as something that's like very radical, very different, very new. It's thousands of dollars for one song. It's some crazy perk or benefit to get you into some exclusive VIP club or something like that. But now what I'm starting to appreciate is just the parity with the existing paradigms. And what I mean by that is an on-chain music product doesn't need to be extremely net new and novel just because it's built on crypto rails. If you can offer a better way for a fan to spend $1 and get a download, that's better than what exists today. That's actually very worth zooming in on. And I think when you look at products like Farcaster and some of these things that are getting popular today, what you're noticing is that they're just enhancing social experiences that have already existed, but they're doing it in a way that doesn't feel radical. You know, you look at things like frames and people being able to collect directly through a social feed. That's not crazy, you know, but I think what we're starting to notice now is that the products that are seeing traction in the space are the ones that are taking an active commitment to building a product that is comparable with the experiences that we all know today. So for example, when I go on Twitter, I have an expectation of what this product's going to feel like. When I go on Spotify, I have an expectation of what this product's going to feel like. And I think my kind of wider sentiment with on-chain music right now is how do we not make people have to create net new behaviors? How do we just give them something that is an existing behavior and then build a better experience on top of that? So I guess turning that into a question just for you guys to comment on, what does the future of catalog radio look like? Is this something that you guys see putting a lot of time and energy into like the accolades and sort of the benefits associated with the cosigns? Do you see it being more on the one-of-one side and really optimizing that experience for deeper collectors? Or how do you guys think about your time allocation over the next 6 months headed into this new chapter of the market?
Yeah, I think I'll just start by saying I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's this idea, like Virgil's idea of like 3% change, and that being like a design philosophy that's often very effective. And I think that I think the problem that people have with solving listeners' problems is a lot of listeners don't have problems right now. Like people love Spotify. People love the DSPs that they use. The UX is great. There's a lot of good things on the listener side. It just happens to be at the expense oftentimes of the artist side. But if we can, create systems that in the good ways, like learn from these platforms and what these platforms are doing right on the listener side, maybe we have an opportunity to bring some of those listeners into this on-chain world. As far as the future for catalog radio, I've already said this a little bit, but we're just really excited by this design space. Like equally as we were excited about the launch and putting this out into the world, now that we have this foundation of broadcasting infrastructure on top of an on-chain music library, there's so much areas to explore with that product space. And I think, there's a few things. That's like one, and where we can dig in a lot deeper on radio and just try things that are novel and new and exciting. Two is I think that radio, in our view, is part of a larger sort of product or product ecosystem, where you're sort of providing the front room, the real-time, more lean-in, active listening space. But then there's also the back room where you can dig through the archives of the marketplace and find the music that you want, maybe assemble playlists and do, what you would expect from a music platform. And we have a lot of those features already built into the marketplace. So on top of really leaning into novel experiments in the radio space, a lot of our efforts, maybe in the near term, will be focused around sort of bringing these things into a holistic whole, and creating an ecosystem that's like coherent and makes sense, because things are a little bit fragmented right now. And yeah, we'll just be continuing to play with like how we can create more value on the listener side and on the artist side, and doing that in ways that take advantage of, the medium of on-chain music.
Yeah. And in terms of what that looks like in a large focus for us, now that we have this radio product out, is just bringing some of the best music on chain, because, the only way that people are going to actually want to listen and tune into the radio and then support something is if they really enjoy the experience. And that starts with the music. And to quickly touch on something you said earlier about just existing behaviors, one thing that has been really fun for me personally using the product is, like, I'm a huge user of Bandcamp, and the checkout experience there is kind of clunky. It's just this like credit card, PayPal, multi-step flow. And the experience of co-signing something on catalog radio is incredible. Like the Rainbow wallet extension, it's one click and then a confirmation, and boom, it's in my wallet near instantly. I can download it right there. So looking at, especially thinking about Bandcamp, as it's been kind of passed around to different parent companies recently. And there's a long history of other music tech companies that have like faltered in or had their ground shaken, whether that's due to market conditions, legal like lawsuits or other things. There is uncertainty in the existence of some of these platforms continuing to exist and some of that music continuing to exist. And people talk about this a lot in crypto, but even just to have that music and those relationships be on chain from the jump is a massive improvement for artists today, even if that importance or that value hasn't been fully realized and recognized yet. Like if Bandcamp were to go under tomorrow, suddenly people would really value those relationships that they had built up over the years, even though it's not as much of an active part of the conversation now. So really just like to bring a Bandcamp like music checkout experience on chain, I think is a huge win in and of itself. And the experiments that we can run around radio just add to that experience, and hopefully we'll bring more people into the fold.
Yeah, I just want to lean in on one thing that Jeremy said initially too, of like bringing the best music on the world on chain and bringing the best artists in the world on chain. I think like we're very grateful and blessed to have a community of artists that trust us enough to put their music on Catalog, and we feel that there's like a really incredible library of music on Catalog, and that's largely like a lot of the feedback that we've gotten around radio is just like people being so surprised that there's such good music on chain, and radio does a really good job of highlighting that. And I would argue that that's like, we feel that that's partially our responsibility as a platform, is like just bring the best music and artists into this world. And I would argue it's sort of like a responsibility of everyone operating this space, whether it's a project, an individual, an artist, or whatever it is. It's like, if we want to see this space going somewhere, the single foremost goal is bring the best music and the best artists on the world on chain and just continue to build it up, because you can build whatever platform, product, artist drop, collective you want, but if the music isn't good or compelling for people, we're not going to go to the places that I think a lot of us want this space to go. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'd say that that's exactly my same motive right now, especially for 2024, is how do you just get artists to be comfortable putting their music on chain, and how do you create an awareness that there actually is amazing emerging artists that are putting their music here that is worth discovering. And I think it's a really interesting, shift into where you guys are currently at, because one thing that I'm noticing a lot is we're back in this world of like abstraction is the best thing ever. Like, let's remove 99% of the crypto again. Let's go back to this whole narrative. And while I'm in that boat, it's very interesting to realize that we were here a year or so ago, and I think that there was a general conversation around like crypto abstraction, making sure that there was no mention of wallets or NFTs or ETH or gas or anything like this. And, you guys are in a unique position where you have this primary product that was built on mainnet. You have this radio product that was built on Base, and you now have this intention to bring this product to people who have largely never touched crypto before. I know it's a very difficult question, but how do you guys think about this term abstraction and what this might look like in the form of a product like Catalog over the next 12 months, let's call it?
Yeah, my own opinions have changed on this over the years. Kayvon from Foundation wrote a really compelling article at one point called Crypto Wants to Be Seen. And those are values that I held very closely for a long time, in the sense that, this is a new and exciting space. And yes, it's hard to get into because there's a lot of things to learn. But that was how the early days of the internet were. Like, the email password login flow was not something that most people were familiar with for a long time. And it took a while for society to get to a place where that was normalized. Now, I think as the technology has matured in a lot of ways, and there are new tools for bringing people on chain without them having to understand these concepts, that's become a more exciting thing for me, because artists who, and really fans or mass portions of the population who would maybe be interested in playing around with this stuff in the first place, stop because, I have to create a wallet and top it up with ETH. And or I have to know how to get it onto a layer 2. And that's such a hurdle that prevents a lot of great music from making its way on chain. And so the way I think about it now is, allowing the crypto natives to continue doing what they like doing, and using their wallet that they've already got set up and all that good stuff. And we've largely built for that up until this point, because I think you need to prove something out with a crypto native audience before you can really scale it up. But now that we're in a place where we have a compelling product with a low cost form of interaction, where an everyday person might be more interested in using it than dropping $500 to $1,000+ on a 101. This is now, I think, a much more appropriate time for us to lean into some of that abstraction and really open the funnel a bit more for people who can and would use this technology.
And the infrastructure's come a long way. It's way different now than it was back then, and like solutions like Privy are just like a lot better than things were even a year ago. So yeah, we're definitely interested in just making things easier, breaking down the barriers.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I used to hold the notion that like music was exciting as a vertical within crypto because it's going to be the thing that brings everyone else on chain. And while I still believe that, I'm kind of realizing that there is a coupling effect that's happening with crypto as a whole supporting people to come on chain too. It's not about music as its vertical in and of itself being the thing that brings the rest of the world on chain. It's being able to put music on, again, a platform like Farcaster, things like Frames, like things that feel very natural to people. And instead of viewing music as its own independent island and silo, it's kind of like, how do we use this as a case study for what is possible within new on-chain social platforms as a whole that can show what happens when we reorient the way that we discover and engage with music. So I guess it's kind of a closing thought here. What's your guys' current vibe, sentiment with kind of on-chain music as a whole, with Catalog as a company as a whole, and what can people be on the lookout from you guys for over the next few months here?
We're just excited. It feels like we're kind of entering a new era for on-chain music, I guess, but for the space more widely, it feels like the energy is just sort of picking up right now, which it always feels good to be around that sort of activity. And I think, like Jeremy mentioned earlier, like with all the developments that we've seen during this bear market on an infrastructure level, I'm just excited to see more ideas proliferate, more products proliferate, more user-friendly platforms for music proliferate in particular. And then as far as the platform, or as far as Catalog Radio, we don't have too much to share as far as like explicit next things that are dropping. I mean, we'll have more to share very soon, but just expect to see interesting and novel, features and experiments in the space that we're in.
Yeah, I'm just super excited to get back into a mode where we're engaging with more artists, from the outreach perspective, now that we have something that I think is more compelling for people to use. And in addition to that, we have shout out Athena from the Catalog team. She's built out this incredible broadcasting system. And as a part of that, one of the things that we're focusing a lot of our attention on is featured broadcasts. So we have these rotating broadcasts that, are playing 24 hours. Every hour is a different genre. And no matter what time of day you come, realistically, you're going to be hearing something new. But for these featured broadcasts, it's both on one hand, a way for us to bring more people from our community or even outside of Web3 into the fold, to give them the chance to share that stage and present music that they're really passionate about, whether it's an artist, like Mike was saying, doing their album release party, whether it's a curator, bringing in music from different parts of the world, or showcasing other things. It's a really exciting experience because now we can share that stage with other people, and that's something that we're going to be ramping up more. If anyone's ever interested in running their own broadcast on Catalog Radio, please reach out. We have a form for it, but for now you can just check out our Discord and our links on our website to get that info. But yeah, just generally really excited about the energy.
I give you guys a lot of credit for being what I would consider the first marketplace to buy on-chain music. When Catalog launched, it was at a very special time in the history of this space as a whole. And I think that people are going to look back on those early records on Catalog and really see that as the start of what became something very powerful for the industry as a whole. So I want to give you guys a lot of congrats for launching radio. I know that it was a long time coming and something that feels like a huge new chapter. And in closing thoughts here, if people want to keep up with you guys and your work, what's the best place for them to do so?
At Catalog Works on Twitter and Instagram, at Catalog on Farcaster. We just started a channel. Sign up for our emails. We put out new stuff there every now and then, but particularly we're also working on editorial content that's really exciting to me. And just want to thank you as well for being an early supporter of Catalog, both on the collector side and kicking around ideas. Wouldn't be here today without your contributions as well. And thanks for having us on the pod. Mike, what else you got?
Plus one to that. Thank you, Cooper. Appreciate you. Always good to speak. Go to catalog.radio. That's the URL, and just listen for a little bit, and I'm sure you'll find some music that you love. And come back at another time of day, and I'm sure you'll find some music in an entirely different genre or region of the world that you'll love. I think Catalog Radio does a really good job of maybe like breaking a stereotype around this space, that there's not as much good music as people think there is. I think there's really a lot of great music here. It's just about highlighting it and spotlighting it. So check that out. And everything else that Jeremy mentioned, of course. And yeah, thanks, Cooper. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, with that, catalog.radio, you guys know where to go. We'll see you again next week, and thank you guys for making the time.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks. Peace.